Well, good evening and good afternoon. Good afternoon to your good selves and good evening to me. I should tell you there's a very good friend of mine in Johannesburg who I'd like to say good evening to. It's my friend Anne Lapidus, and she has just come online and sent me a note. Irish Jewish records are nowhere and everywhere. And today we'll include how Jewish people arrived in Ireland and unusual places information was obtained. On behalf of the Irish Jewish Genealogical Society, a division of the Irish Jewish Museum, I thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I hope that you have many questions for me. I have a question for you. What is the oldest profession in the world? In Genesis chapter 6, verse 6, the lineage from Adam and Eve, there are several generations missing because the scribe did not know who they were. The names were lost in the midst of time. 5,000 years later, we're doing the same thing, researching for that missing link. Genealogy is the oldest profession in the world, followed by bread making. The third oldest is probably the one you originally thought of. I'm sure Adam and Eve would have thought genealogy very boring. A brief background into the Irish Jewish Genealogical Society. If there was just one more member, there would be 100% increase in membership. The upside is that I get no interference from anyone, and the downside, it's a lot of work for one person. 25 years ago, soon after my parents died, I thought it would be a good idea to know my family roots. Little did I realize that 25 years later, I'm still searching for my elusive grandmother, even though I now have accumulated 70,000 other family records. I now know that once a person dies, the library of family details dies with them. Today, we are that library, and tomorrow we are history. It is not how far you can trace your family back that is important. It is what you know of your family and extended relationships that count. With the development of a special Carousel program covering all family details, we're able to print family trees stretching back over 300 years to the present day. I mention this because if anyone out there has an Irish Jewish connection, especially if you belong to the Jackson Gravonsky family, please make contact. And that is my family. It may surprise you to know that there was a Jewish presence in Ireland for nearly 1,000 years. There is a myth that the earliest Jewish inhabitants were from the split tribe of Dan, who settled in the southwest coast of Ireland, bringing with them the magic and the harp. As you know, the harp is the national symbol of Ireland, and more importantly, the symbol on the cans of bottles of beer, of Guinness. The Annals of Inishfollen, a chronicle of Ireland medieval history written by the monks in 1079, mentions 5 Jews came over the sea bearing gifts to King Todeldach of Munster, who was the king of Munster, and were sent back over the sea. Following the expulsion of the Jews from Portugal and Spain in the last decade of the 1400s, some Marano Jews who were merchants made their way to the southwest coast of Ireland. In the town of Youghal, County Cork, the first Jewish Lord Mayor, William Ains, a soldier of fortune, was elected in 1555. Another Jewish mayor was elected in 1576 and 81 called Francis Ains, although the exact relationship to William is unclear. It took another 300 years before the first Jewish Lord Mayor of Dublin in 1896 was elected, Mr. Lewis Harris. Regrettably, he died on the eve of his installation, and it was only 60 years later in 1956 that Mr. Robert Briscoe was elected Lord Mayor of Dublin. So why Ireland? These followers of Moses had originally been invited to leave their home in other countries like Poland by the princesses of Lithuania to open the hinterland, then unspoiled and unoccupied. because of the perceived industry and business acumen, to establish the whiskey industry, which was too lowly for the princesses and minions to be involved in. Over 2 million Jews left Lithuania and the Russian Pale, fleeing persecution from Tsar Alexander II for safety of any country, as far away from the Russian Empire as possible, where they would be able to practice their religion, raise and educate their families, lead a peaceful life, and satisfy their thirst for freedom. The big influx to Ireland happened following the infamous Russian May laws of 1882. Boys from the age of 12 were conscripted into the Russian army for 25 years. As the frequency of pogroms increased, each pogrom was followed by displacement and dispossession. Land and homes were abandoned, often for the slums or ghettos of the rapidly industrializing large towns and cities. Factory work, laboring, and other manual work offered the first steps towards freedom. And freedom meant emigrating to the West and North America. Cormac O'Grada writes, the entire people were herded by the conquering Cossacks into slavery. Children were taken from the parents for slave labor in the mines and to labor camps of the Tsarist masters. This was a life sentence, and the parents preferred the ultimate risk of abandoning their children to the vagaries of an ocean voyage in the hope that they would eventually arrive in the land of the free, America. So why Ireland? The largest influx of Jews to Ireland occurred in 1882, or between 1882 and 1910, with approximately 3,000 arriving from Eastern Europe and mainly settled in Dublin. Smaller numbers established communities in Belfast, Cork, and other towns throughout Ireland. Ireland was a tributary for Eastern European Hebrews westward for somewhat they called England Ireland, before they continued westward to America, the Golden Medina. They hoped they would earn enough money to complete their journey. Many did complete the journey, and others got sidetracked to South Africa. Many migrants were sold tickets to New York and shortchanged by ruthless agents and captains. They were told they were in America, when in fact they were in Cork, in Cove in Cork. It is claimed that some passengers thought that the cry, Cork, Cork, meant they were in New York, New York. The majority of the Irish Jewish community came from a Lithuanian shtetl or village called Achmian. The early arrivals found that Ireland was not a bad place to be, and either wrote home or sent tickets to their families and friends who began to arrive in even greater numbers. Jewish newcomers settled in the south of Dublin city centre, in an area that was eventually dubbed Little Jerusalem. Those who arrived in Cork lived in an area affectionately known even today as Jewtown. They arrived impoverished with a hunger to succeed. Many became door-to-door peddlers selling household wares and holy pictures and were known as weekly men, as the door-to-door rounds took a week to complete. They engaged in money lending, not laundering, tailoring and small manufacturing enterprises. They educated the children who became eminent contributors to Irish society, becoming a major force in manufacturing of clothing and furniture, giving employment to hundreds of Irish workers. Some entered into the political area. The drive also produced generations of doctors, lawyers, legislators, industrialists, artists, and writers. By the 1940s, the Irish Jewish Orthodox community reached a peak of about 5,500 throughout Ireland, but has declined ever since. The Cork synagogue closed in 2016 after 89 years. Today, the Belfast Jewish community is just about hanging on with 66 members. The two main synagogues in Dublin, Orthodox and Progressive, have between them approximately 350 members. I received an email with the heading, "Sir, I do not know who I am." That person was trying to find out their ancestry. And in essence, that has been the compulsive driving force to gather as much of the fragmented details which are nowhere and everywhere, to enable any person researching their heritage to access what is termed as a one-stop shop. I once came across an epitaph on a tombstone which made me stop and think. "Whoever passes this way, lest I be not forgotten." In 100 years' time, the only remembrance of our existence will be the etchings on a block of stone. That is the epitaph I have requested for my own gravestone. What started as a search for my own family records brought me into contact with the Irish Jewish Museum in Dublin. It was a place that I'd never visited before and subsequently spent many, many wonderful hours poring over documents, most of which have never seen the light of day for 100 years. What started out with a £20 or $20 family tree program developed into a personally written Carousel program, which now includes 70,000 individual entries. The program has a potential of 110 fields of information on any one individual, and is now printed into 22 volumes, which we have today. I might say there's only 5 copies of these volumes. The program allows one to view 3 generations at any one time with the ability to add, change, or delete any detail. It all builds up into a profile that at the press of a button can print out a family tree. Albert Einstein once said, "If we knew what we were doing, we would not call it research." Who am I to prove this great man wrong? I guess it is all relative. When searching Irish Jewish records, they are nowhere and everywhere. Where does one begin? Many people focus exclusively on the past, forgetting that the current family details are just as important. Besides the obvious places to look for birth, marriage, and death details, now commercially available on most internet sites, they do not provide more than what I call couch research. It is simply not the same of having the feel of a lofty, dusty tome in one's hand, feeling the pages of yesteryear, scanning the pages, looking for that missing detail, and the excitement of finding yet another unexpected discovery. I guess life for this researcher is made somewhat easier and at the same time more complicated. The details of every individual, family, extended family, and anyone with an association to Ireland are entered into the Carousel program, which has the ability, as mentioned, to amalgamate the fractional details for posterity. So where do we look outside the box? School records are a wonderful, underused resource. Jewish children attended many different schools throughout Ireland, of which there are over 10,000 names so far recorded. Besides entering the initial findings into a dedicated database, they were added to the family Carousel or program profile in the Carousel program. Details observed were date of birth, previous school, father's name and occupation, address, leaving for another school, or leaving to emigrate. From the birth dates of school pupils, it became easier to research for the marriage details of the parents, emigration records, and death records. While in Belfast City Centre Library, I came across the order of burial requiring the ground to be opened for burial of Irish Jewish ground in Belfast in 1873. This was in Belfast City Centre, where I did not know the cemetery even existed. It had long closed before my time. Due to vandalism, there is very few standing tombstones. Information provided was the date and cause of death, section number and person's name, age, occupation, residential address, and the fee for opening the grave, 10 shillings, probably the equivalent of $2. This naturally led to further investigation. There are 14 areas where death details were found, and probably one of the most unusual places of research was the time going to the appointed funeral directors for the Dublin Jewish community. Despite my high hopes, there was no records that were not already recorded. The practice of erecting gravestones as a symbol of respect for the dead comes from the book of Genesis, where Jacob's wife Rachel died on the road to Bethlehem. He set a pillar upon her grave. Gravestones are erected generally 11 months after death to allow the earth to settle. Jewish gravestone inscriptions are a very valuable source of missing information and frequently more reliable than the data entered into the official registers. Memorial plaques in place of worship with window dedications are another source of family details overlooked. The inscription and interpretation of symbols on gravestones of two hands is for a Cohen or priest. A pitcher signifies a Levite who were responsible for cleaning the hands and feet of the temple priest in ancient days. A candle or candelabra signifies a woman. A broken branch of a tree stump signifies somebody who died young. Every Jewish child has a Hebrew name as well as a civil name. Hebrew names are given at the ceremony soon after birth. Most regrettably, they are not recorded in any official register. Whereas boys are, when attaining their bar mitzvah at the age of 13, they are called to read a portion of the Torah using their Hebrew name. Girls only use their Hebrew name either at marriage or death. By then, many are lost in the midst of time. A Dublin mole or circumciser, Reverend Gudansky, was unusual. He recorded in minute detail the condition of the child, if he had jaundice, his weight, his date of birth, the hospital or nursing home, the mother's name and maiden name, father's name, date of circumcision, the doctor attending, and the parents' address. One of Reverend Gudansky's entries in particular caught my eye. Nurse fainted. Each year on Yom Kippur Eve, the day of repentance, synagogues hold charity appeals. The Adelaide Road Synagogue Cornidra Appeal of 1905 lists the donors with address and the amount donated. This information was found in a file in the Dublin Jewish Museum. There were 159 male members who contributed to this 1905 appeal. I was able to cross-reference this listing with the 1901 and 1911 census results. Today, you can sit in Allen, Fort Wayne, and save the journey to Dublin National Archives for the same census results 25 years ago. It was a laborious research. There was an added bonus. The census index book had streets listed with the religion of the occupiers and families, leading to yet more discovery. This moment in time was duly recorded and added to were known to the individual. This was also reflected in the findings of other Jewish places of worship, including Cork and Belfast. The 1913 Synagogue Building Fund of another Dublin synagogue, Greenville Hall, yielded yet more names and addresses from the weekly collections. Hundreds of memorial notices sent from places of worship, reminding their members to light a memorial candle for their deceased loved one, provided not only the name and Hebrew name, but also the relationship of mother, father, brother, sister, child, aunt, uncle, and grandparents, etc. Memorial plaques in the Dublin Old Age Home, providing missing family details not observed on tombstones, as well as memorial notices sent out each year on the anniversary of the death of a family member. Hundreds of these notices were sent to family members around the world, eliciting yet more information. Each place of worship also sent yearly memorial notices. When the synagogues were closed, the memorial notices recorded turned up in the Irish Jewish Museum. Calendar of wills in the National Archives gave the value of the person's estate with date of death and address. prayer books presented in memory of a bar mitzvah or wedding or death or another source overlooked. Synagogues have a special book in which are recorded the names of the people to be honored to call up to the Torah on the Sabbath or festival day. The name, of course, are always in Hebrew. There are 7 Jewish burial grounds in Ireland, 3 in Dublin, 1 in Cork, 1 in Limerick, and 2 in Belfast. I visited them all, documented the entries. There are over 6,700 burials out of a total of 17,495 burials worldwide entered into our database. One day, while codifying the Dublin Dolphins Barn Cemetery, it was a cold, frosty day and a March day with a fox for company. I decided around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, enough was enough. On reaching the gate, it was locked. Well, I nearly freaked out. There were no cell phones in those days. I could envisage myself being locked in for the night with dead company, my back to a tombstone, and Marley's ghost tapping me on the shoulder. There were children playing in the street. I rattled the gate so hard it nearly came off its hinges. They finally caught their attention. They thought the whole episode hilarious. Eventually, they went and called the caretaker. Sometimes mistakes can happen in a cemetery. There was a recent court case where a grave was reserved for a wife to be next to her husband. When it was discovered that somebody else had been buried there, the widow went to court. The judge ruled her legal right to be buried in the reserved space should be respected and ordered the exhumation, but only after the adjournment to enable the parties to discuss a suggestion that she might be buried in a vacant plot at the foot of her husband's grave. This was not acceptable to the widow, as I quote, "Her husband never bullied her or trampled on her in life, and she did not like the idea of being under his feet." The cemetery interments and inscriptions were photographed for Dublin, Belfast, Cork, and Limerick. During World War II, Southern Ireland failed miserably in allowing asylum seekers escaping the horrors of Nazi Germany into the country. During this period, out of 1,500 or so applicants for visas, the Irish government granted asylum to a mere 60 Jews, providing they would set up industries and give employment. Northern Ireland, which was under British rule, allowed 100 traumatized kinder transport children who found safety from Nazi Germany between 1938 and 1948 in Malile Farm, County Down, 20 miles from Belfast. These unaccompanied minors found a safe resting place from death. The school enrollment details were found and included not only these refugees, but the names and addresses of the Belfast Jewish children who were evacuated to Malile to escape the German bombings of the shipyards. I once attended a family ancestry day in Dungannon, Northern Ireland. Another exhibitor showed me a photograph of Gibraltarian Jewish refugees who were evacuated to Saintfield during World War II. Some of the names were known to me from the Belfast recorded marriages. I was not aware that there was a refugee camp there. This photo had names. Entering the details into the database, I decided to explore further with a phone call to the Gibraltar Directory Inquiries, mentioning my reason and eliciting their help. The first name I gave had a phone number. Making a cold call is not easy. In this case, I hit the jackpot, and most of Saintfield residents whose initial names we already had were updated for posterity. Ireland's alien file, or another remarkable source of detail. During the 1914-22 period, all non-British subjects were obliged to report to the nearest police station to register their presence. If they traveled more than 8 miles from their home, they needed to register in that district. Regrettably, these police files were thrown into the garbage, and only 2 known registers survived for the whole of the country. One file is in the National Archives and the other in private possession. I had heard of this book, and making inquiries by a circular route, I received a call from a solicitor's office requesting me to attend. An unnamed person had left a copy of the microfilm of the alien file for my use for 2 weeks only, to be returned under, and I quote, penalty of death. This file provided me with a mine of critical information: full date and place of birth, nationality, date of arrival, children's names, age, address, dates, occupation, and business address. Other details included a description of the individual and Russian army records, religion too, in many instances being Russian, Jew, or Jewess. The authorities failed to supply the same information for a Belgian or French nationality, or French national if they are Christian or Protestant. Personally, the most exciting piece of information for me was the signature of the alien. It was thrilling to think that 100 years ago, a family ancestor whose native tongue was not English signed their name in a new foreign script in the first struggle to establish themselves in a new life, safe from religious hatred and persecution. How precious to hold such a living document. In many cases, the alien in question were unable to read or write, and in fact would not speak English. They signed their name with an X. With 20,585 marriage records, one would think there was nothing more to learn. I was recently bowled over, having purchased a book, Tracing Your Jewish Ancestors, a guide to family historians by Rosemary Wesenroll. It is very common to find older civil marriage certificates with the signature marked with an X, indicating they were not able to write their name. However, in some instances where the person could not write, it was shown not only with an X, but an O beside their name. And why? Because Jewish people did not want to put their mark of a cross and use the circle instead. You learn something every day. As for the Jewish marriage records, no one knew where they were. However, by diligently researching, I eventually found most of the records. There was one set missing, including my parents' marriage in 1943 in the United Hebrew Dublin congregation, otherwise known as Greenville Hall Shul. Germany purposely bombed the Jewish area in Dublin in neutral Ireland. One bomb landed near the shul, destroying the building and the marriage record book. This was the first and only time the Germans paid for the restoration of a synagogue. Fortunately, marriages are recorded in 2 registers. When full, one book is sent to the superintendent's register in the district the synagogue is situated. Irish Jewish marriages took place from 1845 under license. Previous marriages were recorded by the church authorities. When making inquiries for these earlier records, someone suggested I look in the General Registration Office in Roscommon, 97 miles from Dublin, where the records and files were sent for storage. Taking a day of work and traveling to Roscommon, the registrar apologized that he could not find any books that I was looking for. However, he said, would I be interested in these 2 volumes? You could have knocked me down with a feather. He presented me with marriage records of Mary's Abbey Synagogue from Dublin from 1845, 1 year after the new regulations came into force, and the marriage records for another Dublin synagogue, Camden Street, which I had never knew even existed. I could hardly believe my eyes. What I was looking at was history unfolding in front of me. I asked if I could take the extracts. That posed no problem, except that they would have necessitated me traveling 96 miles each way to Roscommon for months on end. Clearly, mission impossible. It was nearly lunchtime, and they were going for lunch. I asked if I could stay. They agreed and locked me in. They even agreed for me to use a photocopier for the odd copy. That lunch hour, that copier was so hot, you could have fried an egg on it. As a result, I now have complete of official burial records on marriage records from 1845 to 2020, with the original signatures, some in Yiddish and many with the marked X. Another source of information is where I meet individuals on my travels. Last week, I was entering a hospital elevator in London. I am in London, by the way. I asked someone if he would translate into English a gravestone inscription from Hebrew. On inquiring if he had any Irish Jewish family, he said yes. And a phone call later, another family was added to the records. Another time, while I was having a cup of tea on a warm summer's day, when a stranger detected that I had an Irish accent. You can guess the rest. His mother was born in Cork and Jewish to the Jewish community, and I had yet more information to add. While on vacation in Canada, another person sitting beside me on a bus revealed he too had an Irish Jewish connection. Last week in the pharmacy, while waiting to be served, I met another person with an Irish connection, and the same when I took a walk through our local park. And of course, I gather much valuable details from people who attend my talks and approach me afterwards. And that's not so easy on Zoom. Some other unusual places to find family details are wedding invitation lists with the names and addresses, with sometimes even phone numbers. Specially printed Grace After Meal books of weddings and bar mitzvahs also provide useful information. From bar mitzvah books, I simply deduct 13 years from the bar mitzvah date, which gives a useful birth date. Yarmulkes or head coverings left on the table for weddings or bar mitzvahs often have the name of the participant and printed inside and date, another innovative source of family detail. Old address books are another useful source. Some of these were in the Irish Jewish Museum. It was difficult to know the relationship between the people and the owner of the address book. I solved this problem by contacting family members who would explain the intricate web of family relationships. A further rich source are congregational yearbooks, especially the social and personal greeting section, and records of engagements, marriages, births, and deaths. The discovery of the 1927 16th Dublin Jewish Scout Register, including the tests passed, also the guides, brownie registers, were a valuable, unrecognized place of information. And what about the Dublin Jewish Golf Club membership and Masonic members, each adding a moment in time to the individual's record? British War Memorial Commission approached me when making inquiries about Irish Jewish people who fought and died in the Second World War. Again, shared details. I also participated in the NBC program called Who Do You Think You Are? The person at the center of this episode was Rashida Jones, the daughter of Quincy Jones, the musician and composer. Rashida's mother, Peggy Lipton, was born in New York, but Peggy's mother, Rita Benson, was a member of the Irish Jewish community. Once again, family details were shared. I frequently receive inheritance inquiries about estates looking for relatives of the deceased. Again, an unusual area for information to be gathered. Several books have been published about Jews of Ireland, providing information. One book by Louis Hyman proved a most valuable, almost like a Bible, of the early Irish Jewish history up to 1910. It allowed me to follow the family threads that make us, or of this unique tapestry of Irish Jewry. Other printed records include street directories and valuation office records. A more recent book, Erin's Children, by Merton Davis, History and Stories of Irish Jewry, available on Amazon for $25, is a wonderful collection of musings and amusings of the Irish Jewish community. In conclusion, I think it is fair to say that in compiling my database of Irish Jewish persons with Irish connections, I have scored and sourced Irish Jewish records, and I have to tell you, are nowhere and everywhere. I leave you with this thought. With all the areas I have mentioned and covered today, the reason for my original quest was finding my elusive grandmother. Remains just that, elusive. I still not found the information I seek. My search continues. And with 70,000 records, none of them ever made the hit of #1. Thank you.
That was great, Stuart. There are some questions in here. There were a number of questions about the Carousel database, but before we get into those, because that I think will end up leading to a longer conversation, there was a question about the alien record books, where you can find them, where you can find refugee books. I did share a link to your website, to the miscellaneous records page, because I saw that you had a link to the 1914-1918 alien register.
Yes.
But did you have anything to maybe add to that? Because I'm not super familiar with the alien register myself. Are those records not complete?
When you say the records aren't complete, there's only 2 volumes that are
There are only
known.
2 volumes. Oh,
There's
okay.
only 2 volumes. Other towns and cities, when the various police stations closed, they threw out all the detail, all the records. They didn't think of keeping them for posterity. One person was I actually do know of the source of the one that I had to sign under penalty of death. I found out subsequently that a police officer thought this might be useful and retained it and gave it to an individual. And I, in the end, was able to get hold of it. There's a whole story involved in that, besides the penalty of death. I have the details and the extracts. And a copy of obviously have the hard copy, which is wonderful to see, not only of Jewish people, but everybody else. There's Chinese and there's Japanese and there's Belgians, Swiss, every country is listed there, but I'm only interested in the Jewish ones.
Right. And I will say this to everybody: if you're looking for resources, if you even have even a suspected Irish Jewish connection, contact Stuart. I'm about to put his email into the chat, but he is the authority on the subject. Definitely contact Stuart, even if you think you might have a connection, and he can give you some ideas. Now, the Carousel database. There were some questions about how would somebody access that? Do they just need to contact you? Is there, because I saw on your website, there's a way of doing a sort of light searching type things where you could see that things are available, but then they would have to contact you. Could you elaborate on how people can maybe best use the database?
Well, they can't. The simple answer is they can't.
Yeah.
It is in my computer, and the extracts are online. They can be purchased online, but nobody likes to pay for them. But I'm more interested in people making contact with me, and then because I get not only their details, but I also find out what happened to other members of the families who went abroad, who have this Irish connection. And that's how you build up the database for posterity. Then each 5 years, they are printed into a new updated version of my book in the Heritage series. The last one I did last year had said just a 66 or 68,000 individual records. I have a book here. Oh, they're so big. I don't know if you can see that. It is the Book of Irish Jewry. This is only half the book. It's L to Z, and it was printed in, well, I don't know, it's 52,000 records there. 52,000 records. The 1700 to 2014, but there has been updated version last year of that book. Oh, I'll show you the individuals inside. Might be
someone named Jason
that's
asked,
what it looked like.
Someone just asked, where's A to K?
What's that?
Someone just asked, where's A to K?
Oh, I have it on the shelf. Very observant, yes.
Yeah.
It's there, all right. Those two make up one volume. There was 52,000 records there in 2014, and now we have 70,000 to today. So I produced it each 5 years, just in case. At 78, I don't really know when it's going to be. Yes.
I was just told to tell you that the person who asked was Jason.
Oh, Jason. Well, my son, these books, well, Jason will tell you as he's going to use them as a doorstop. So I have 22 volumes, and then besides being, one is going to use them for lighting a fire, another's going to use them for two children for a doorstop. But
you could use one as a weapon if someone was to attack you.
They would stop. Yes, they could. They would certainly get a belt. And I have these 22 volumes, and I need to know what I'm going to do with them as the years are going by. So if which repository would be worthy to have them, and then I have to say in return what I'm going to get a little recognition in return.
Speaking of repositories having your books, one person did ask if we, the Allen County Public Library, had any of your books. We do have Idiot's Guide, which I know you have that handy.
Yes, this is the Idiot's Guide.
Yes, the Idiot's Guide to Irish Jewish Ancestry. We do have that book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We got 200 printed, and I need to sell 300 to break even. But there's very few left. And that's interesting, because in there, it does tell you how to go about discovering your Irish Jewish ancestry. And as I say, there's 14 different areas where information of burials or death is found. Who would think of 14? I went through some of them this evening, but that's just, I have to make it interesting for everybody to not to bore you too much. Oh, there's something wrong here. Oh. What's that?
I don't know.
I don't know. I'm there.
I don't know. That's okay.
Okay.
You know, you mentioned that, you know, doing these Zoom programs, that sometimes you feel like
you're... The sound is gone. 1 sec.
Oh.
What happened to my sound? It's gone down.
Can you hear me now? Oh,
crystal clear.
Great, yes. Great. You mentioned earlier that sometimes you feel that doing these Zoom programs, you're missing kind of making those connections, you know, with people who do have an Irish Jewish connection that you might not have made that connection, you know, otherwise. One person did ask in the chat, anyone here with family that lived in Limerick in the early 1900s? And then you had people sharing emails amongst themselves. So it does still happen. So as I said earlier, if you do have that connection, definitely reach out to Stuart. I'll put his email again into the chat.
Oh.
Okay. Let's see. There were a lot of comments in the chat about how they love some of your various stories. One of which, your mention of a gravestone of a woman who does not want to be forgotten.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I shared a little story. I was working in a graveyard at one time. I was early in the morning, and I see these four attendants with a coffin, pallbearers with a coffin on their shoulder. And then 4 hours later, I see the same coffin with the same pallbearers walking around. I take it they lost the plot.
Oh. Wow.
All right. Okay.
Well, and you know, somebody else thought it was they said that they loved your story about being locked in a cemetery.
Oh, that's true. It happened twice, actually. It happened in Cork as well.
Oh, no.
That's a nice cemetery in Cork, overlooking the River Lee.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, your son said that's a proper dad joke. Oh, great. Well, thank you, Stuart, for sharing such, wonderful knowledge with all of us. If any of you have more questions, feel free to send Stuart a question, or you can always email us and we can forward things on to Stuart as well. Our email is genealogy@acpl.info, which I'll stick that in the chat, those who might need it. And if anyone would like a copy of the chat, feel free to send us an email for that as well. This program is being recorded, so it will eventually make it onto our YouTube channel, which I'll put a link to that in the chat as well. Let me see. Okay. Oh, I see something on the Q&A. The fact that they thought they were in New York but were in Cork is surely a myth or an urban legend. Maybe. No.
No. They were shortchanged. One man arrived in Cork and he got off, and he actually ended up in Limerick. He was there for 2 weeks before he realized he wasn't in America. It's very hard for us to understand, with the education, even the minimal education, the world is where the world is. But you're talking about people coming from the bog end of nowhere, without any language, with no knowledge.
Yeah.
And in fairness to them, they were only too pleased to get off the boat as well, and they were welcomed in. There were people going down to the various ports when the boats came in to welcome or to find out any Jewish people and to bring them into the community. I know in one instance, there was a gentleman got off, a young boy, well, a young gentleman in his teens or so, he got off the boat in a place called Drogheda, because the boats happened to go in there. And he walked around, see what it was like. And then when he came back to the port, the ship was in the distance. And he was standing on the dock on his own, and two farmers saw him, and they brought him home, because they can't speak Hebrew or Russian, and he doesn't speak English or whatever. And it was 2 years later, they decided they would go by horse and cart to Dublin. On a Sunday, they obviously found there was a Jewish area there. They brought this young man down, and they went into a shop, and they started speaking to the boy started speaking to the owners, and he was left with them. And eventually he married somebody in the community, and the rest is history. So there you are. Same thing's happening today, unfortunately. Now, how are we doing for time?
We got a little bit of time left. I only see one question really left, and this is actually kind of a good question to end on, because it's about your family. Someone wanted to know if your family was originally from Lithuania.
Oh yes, my mother's side, they come from a place called Akmian, a little village in Lithuania, and my father was born in Poland, and he came over just after the First World War. He came to London, then he came to Belfast and Dublin, and I'm here. I didn't demonstrate the Carousel program. Do you have a few minutes
yes, people would enjoy to see that. Enjoy seeing that.
Right. Let's see. Oh, let me see what I can find out here. All right, can you see? Oh, I have to share the screen, do I?
Yes.
That's a good idea. Share the screen. And
beautiful.
All right. I've actually already opened the Carousel program. If I put in any name, I'll show you how it actually works. I'm going to demonstrate. I put in a few names by the name of Delete. So everybody by the name of Delete comes up, and I can search everybody called delete. And I want to see if any of these people are associated with each other. So we have all these Stuarts, I don't know, and we have a Beverly, and we have a Jacob delete, and Marjan delete, Martin Sidney delete, also known as Delicious, and we have a Zena delete Jackson. Well, are you seeing the picture in the corner there? Is that better?
Yeah.
Well, I've moved you down. Okay.
I can see something. I can see it all.
You see it all. Well, here you have Zena, born in 1914 in Dublin. So if we want to, we can put in 1914 here, because we already know that they were born in 1914 and they got married in Greenville Hall in 1942. That's in Dublin. I'll just leave that for the moment. Then we have a man called Stuart Delete, who was born in 1944. Well, I'm going to just mark him to join in. So we know this man is born in 1944, and that's him there. And we found another Stuart Delete. Is that Stuart Delete the same as the other Stuart Delete? This one went to a school in Dublin and in 1944. Well, let's say he is. So we mark him to delete, to combine, and we combine the two of them together. And the father's name is Martin Sidney, and Zena delete, the sister is Hilary. So, okay. So now
this is, I'm sorry, so this is basically how you prevent having too many duplicate people,
yes.
Right?
Well, there were all the different areas that I told you where the information comes in. They were put into 16 different databases originally.
Oh.
Well, a computer programmer came my way and explained my predicament, and he said, leave it with me for a week. They came back and said, all these people have something in common. So we have another Stuart here, and we're going down. We have another Stuart here, 1944. So here we have a full date of birth. We know that he was born in Belfast, and we'll join him in as well. So we say yes. Now we have a choice. You want the 1944, the 23rd of the 2nd, or do you want to keep the third one? Well, we don't for that. And then the father is delete there, and the mother is, and he has a sister called Hilary. So that's that one in. So now we have a little bit more information. And then we go in and we can see this one here. This person here is Stuart, that's his Hebrew name, and the cemetery is going to go into, died in, was in Dolphin's Barn, section G, 10, 110, and he died from a shortage of breath and acute prognoplexia. And whoever reads this, lest I be not forgotten. That seems familiar. So that's him again. So we combine that. And then that's Father Zena, Hilary. And now we have the inscription added into his name. Then what we want to do is search. See, now that it's gone down a little bit. Let me see about another. So this Stuart is the same as this Stuart, but except this case he's married. And we combine them together. And then we'll see what else we have. We have another Stuart. So here we have a situation where we have an unknown, this person, Stuart A, got married to an unknown person. So we just mark him there. And we combine it in. So now we have a middle name and full date of marriage and the synagogue and the fathers and Zena. And the wife's name is Beverly and Hilary. And that's how it works. Now let's see if we put these combining together. So an unknown, the other person was unknown as a wife. Now we have the full name. And the maiden name is Gray, Stuart A. Now, and that's it for the moment. And it goes on, and that continues all the time. So now we've built up a profile of Stuart. Delete. He was born in 23rd, 2nd, 44 in Belfast. He lived in these addresses in Dublin. That's where he got married. The synagogue got married. Its Hebrew name, the place of worship, place of death, the reason of the death in inscription. He's married with 2 children, 1 girl and 1 boy. And the religion is very important to write in, because people marry in, they marry out, and the ministers like to know, if they're Orthodox ones anyway, they like to know the lineage coming down from the female side. And then the school that they attended was in Wesley College. The occupation is family research in 2022. And then you can add in a phone number, which is never printed, or an email address, which is never printed, a business address. And this is for the alien registration, is the extracts from the alien book would be arrived in. Nationality could be Polish. The date of arrival, 1917.
Speaking of immigration, there is a question that just appeared about whether, do you know which port, now, excuse me if I mispronounce this, Akmayan? A-K-M-E-Y-A-N? Jews. Yes, Akmayan. Okay. Which port they would have left the Russian Empire from, and do you know if there are any transport records?
No, I don't. I don't have any notice of that. No.
Yeah.
No. And this is where we have put in for naturalized, so they became a British or American or whatever country. GRO reference, the person is born, it's say for birth, this is in February, it's Q2. I know it's actually volume 2. Volume 2 is for Dublin, and the page we'll say is 1, 2, 3, and the entry number would be 24. So therefore, and that's the birth. And then you have for the marriage, you put down M for marriage, and it just goes on like that. The 28th, there's 1972. And these are reference numbers appertaining to where you can find them in the National Archives, or National General Registration Office here in Ireland. Some of them are online. Mm-hmm. Up to a certain dates, they are available online, but not the same thing as opening up the volume and finding it.
Right, there. Right. Okay. Well, this has been lovely, Stuart. We are just about out of time. Thank you again for sharing this really fascinating database with everybody and sharing all of your wonderful knowledge with us.
You can always invite me over anytime in person. I don't mind.
Well, one day, you know.
How do I get back to see myself?
I will stop sharing your screen for you.
Oh, there you
go.
I see myself up there. I haven't changed in the last hour.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for visiting us. If you would like a copy of the chat, as I said earlier, feel free to send us an email. Our email is genealogy@acpl.info, which I'm sticking that in the chat right now.
Okay, all right. I'm going to have a cup of tea and a biscuit. I think I deserve it. Really, fair enough. And yes. I wish you all good health. This is we call it Ishkawara. It's actually tap water.
Great. Well, have a good evening, Stuart. And for everyone else, feel free to join us again, either this Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time or next Tuesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
You're more than welcome. Bye-bye to you all. And thank you for listening in. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.